Hey, I'm Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about not my top 10 favorite games, but the top 10 favorite games of my geek buddies. And let me give you some context for what that means and why it's meaningful for me, I guess, in this channel, and maybe you if you like some of my game recommendations. I recently did a blog post about BoardGameGeek. BoardGameGeek is a massive online community and hub and database of board games, and it's a place to talk about board games. I check it many times a day as a publisher to see if people have questions or concerns about our games. I can answer them there. I can celebrate our games and other games from other designers and other publishers there. It's where I rate games to share my opinions about games. Something I kind of do on this channel, but I don't really share my ratings of games here. I share my favorite elements of games here. And I recently learned while writing this article, the article was kind of about things that maybe most people don't know about BoardGameGeek, including myself. I asked other people for their thoughts on what they use BoardGameGeek for that other people may not know about. And one of those things is the use of GeekBuddies. And I had no GeekBuddies until about a week ago. And then I started adding a bunch of GeekBuddies because I learned something that you can do with GeekBuddies. And that's where this list came from. I basically asked Stonemaier ambassadors if they think they have a similar taste in games to me. And maybe you watching this video, if you have a similar taste in games to me, let me know your BoardGameGeek username. I would love to add you as a Geek Buddy, because what you can do if you have a bunch of Geek Buddies that have similar tastes to you, not that that is a requirement for having a Geek Buddy, but there's something that you can do if that is true. And so if you have a bunch of Geek Buddies who have similar taste to you, taste in games, you can look at their favorite games. You can look at how this group of other people, the average of how they've rated games. So instead of looking at the overall total ranking of all games on BoardGameGeek, which includes a vast variety of preferences, which is awesome. It's awesome to have that list on BoardGameGeek, the rankings, where you can see how many different people feel about games. Instead of looking at that massive list, you can look at a very small catered list of people who like the same types of games that you typically like. And by doing this, you might be able to learn some games that you didn't expect that you might like. And you can also just learn a little bit about what other people think, especially if these are people who think a little bit similarly to you. And so I did this. I sorted. I looked for people who had rated. I looked for games that have been rated by these Geek Buddies, around 100 different Geek Buddies that have been rated at least 10 times, and I looked at the average rating of those games. And I learned about a lot of information about that. So this is a list of the top 10 games rated by people who believe that they have very similar taste in games to me. And based on this list, I would mostly agree with that. And I also there are a few games on here that I almost think I should try. I should give another chance. I should play more often. Because there are some games on here that I haven't played all that much of. Just a few. Of course, there are also some Stonemaier games on this list. So I sorted by people who had rated, Geek Buddies who had rated these games at least 10 times, at least 10 rankings per game. And I did not count expansions. There were expansions included in this list, so I didn't count them for these rankings. But there were some Stonemaier games, and the top Stonemaier games that appeared on the list were Scythe, Viticulture, and Wingspan Asia. But this makes sense. These are ambassadors who closely follow Stonemaier games and maybe even closely follow me. And so it makes sense that they would have some similar preferences in terms of Stonemaier games. However, I didn't include any of them on this list. But if you want to consider some Stonemaier games that people who like my taste in games also like, Scythe, Viticulture, and Wingspan Asia were the top picks of those games. So let's jump into this oddly crafted list, and we'll talk about the different games on it. So, and actually, one last thing before I jump in, I'm trying to see if there's any game on this list on the top 50 that I just haven't played at all, that like I need to play because, and I don't see one. I think every game on this list I have actually played at least once, but there are a couple games on this list that I have not played more than once or twice. I'm looking at the total top 50 here. Anyway, let's share my screen so you can see. Number 10 is Crokinole. Crokinole is the top or the number 10 pick from GeekBuddies, who share a similar taste in games to me. And Crokinole is an abstract game, or not an abstract game. It's a dexterity game. It is abstract too, but it's a dexterity game where you team up with another player to flick these tokens in such a way that every time you flick one, you have to try to hit an opponent's token first. It has to be the first thing that you touch, and then after that, your token can go anywhere. And you're trying to get all the tokens as close to the middle, if not even in this middle hole, as possible. And you score some points at the end of the round. You play to a certain number of points, and the game is over. It is a really fun, casual game. I don't want to say quite party game, but it has the feel of a party game because there's cheering, there's partnership, there's ups and downs. There's times where you will completely miss what you thought you were aiming at. There's sometimes where you will completely miss the thing that you thought you were aiming at, but you'll end up with a great shot. I ranked this. I did a video a while ago about my top 10 favorite games that I think you might like if you like disc golf. And this was my number one pick because this is in a way disc golf on the table, but with a partner, but with doubles. Except in disc golf, you're not trying to hit someone else's disc, but it has the dexterity feeling of disc golf combined into just a small tabletop surface. If I had a favorite mechanism in it, it would probably be that rule that you have to hit another player's token. I think that adds a really interesting dynamic to it. Otherwise, you just try to flick it as close to the middle every time. So I like that rule of you are required to try to hit an opponent's token along the way, and that can lead to some hijinks while you're playing. So Crokinole is the game that again, these aren't my rankings. These are the rankings of people who believe they have similar tastes in games to me. Crokinole at number 10. At number 9, there are a few different campaign and legacy games on this list. This isn't quite one of them, but this is Clank Catacombs. Clank Catacombs, so this is actually one of 2 appearances of Clank on this list in 2 different forms. I was confusing them as I was talking there a little bit. But Clank Catacombs is a version of the deck building dungeon, kind of dungeon crawl-ish game, where you are running into a dungeon, gathering some treasure. Hopefully, you need to get an artifact, and then making your way back out of this dungeon. This one surprised me a little bit because I have found, as much as I appreciate the design of Clank Catacombs, I think it's rather genius that you build the board as you play. You don't know how the board will form. I actually find that I like the original Clank better. I like to be able to look at the paths and kind of plan what I might do, and to see the paths not taken, to see as I'm taking this path, there's another path that I didn't take. So I found it interesting that above Clank Catacombs appeared on this list. However, it does have a lot of replayability and variability because you are building the board as you play every time. The board will end up very different every time you play Clank Catacombs compared to the original Clank, where the board is one of 2 sides of the board. It's going to be one of those 2 sides of the board every time you play. So it is a really clever implementation, and my geek buddies apparently like this game more than they like the original Clank. So it's Clank Catacombs at number 9. And number 8 is this is actually one of the campaign games that are on the list. This is Gloomhaven: Jaws of the Lion. A really beautiful photo here taken by Kevin. I like this this setting on this nice wooden desk of Gloomhaven: Jaws of the Lion. I've actually done a full video about this game. This is a game where I play through the tutorial and a 5-game tutorial, and I thought it was an excellent introduction to a very complex game. I know those of you who have played Gloomhaven dozens and maybe even hundreds of times, it maybe doesn't seem like a complicated game anymore, but to onboard myself into Gloomhaven after not playing for many, many years, I really benefited from this tutorial. So I think this is a tutorial worth studying if you are trying to introduce a complex campaign game to any player. If you've designed a complex campaign game, I think this is a great tutorial to consider offering to your players. And I think it might be one of the first uses beyond Sleeping Gods of using a book for a dungeon crawl. I think that this is a really great use of a book. Instead of asking players to flip through a bunch of tiles and put them and set them on the table, this book is a great way to advance from one mission to the next. And you can even combine multiple books at times when you have a pretty big scenario. In addition, on the books, I like that you have the rules right there on the page. You don't have to remember any specific rules to that scenario because they are printed on the page itself. Yeah, really clever implementation of a tutorial and a and just the playing surface itself in Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. Am I surprised that GeekBuddies picked this one? Maybe a little bit, because this is Gloomhaven is not a game that has drawn me back time after time, because it largely is a game about killing all the bad guys, and that doesn't excite me thematically, and for me can oftentimes get quite repetitive, even with the great mechanisms in this game, and even with a variety of characters and villains. For a game to hook me multiple times, it just doesn't happen to hook me personally. So it's a little surprising that this was on the GeekBuddies list, but I'm always glad when a game is bringing joy to people, and I'm glad that people who share similar games to me enjoy this game, Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, at number 8. At number 7 is Dune Imperium Uprising. So both Dune Imperiums are going to appear on this list. Dune Imperium Uprising, slightly lower than Dune Imperium, the original Dune Imperium. This is a wonderful, in my opinion, this is one of my favorite games, a wonderful deck building game with worker placement. Combines those two elements in a really clever way, where the cards that you're playing determine where you can place workers, and the cards that you don't play are left in your hand to use either to acquire more cards or to participate in the battle that happens at the end of each round. There are a lot of little enhancements. I don't even know if enhancements is quite the right word, but they definitely consider the original Dune Imperium when designing this version of Dune. But it isn't an exact replacement. They just simply offered some new mechanisms in the game, like these spies that give you access to action spaces if on a later turn, if you're blocked off from those spaces. They changed the different factions that you're trying to influence and some of the benefits that you gain from influencing them. They had some elements like sandworms and kind of made the game a little bit more thematic, even though I found the original game very thematic as well. So yeah, Dune Imperium Uprising. So I guess I'm maybe a little surprised that this one is ranked lower by GeekBuddies, but me personally, I'm glad to play either version of Dune Imperium, so I can understand why they're both on this list. It's a game where you have a lot of great choices. You can be a little sneaky, but there's great agency, a little bit of randomness in the cards that you draw. Yeah, just a wonderful game, Dune Imperium Uprising. And number 7. At number 6, so this was one of the other surprises on the list, because Star Wars Rebellion, a game that I really, really love and appreciate, but one that I very rarely play because it is a 2-player game that can take between 3 and 5 hours. I'm sure there were some of you who will hear that and think, oh, I can play this in 90 minutes. Congratulations, that's awesome. I have never gotten even close to that, and I'm a fast player when I play games. It is a truly epic, I believe, 2-player game. Epic not just because of the length, but because of the story you tell while you are playing this game. It is a game of cat and mouse between the Empire and the Rebellion, where the Empire is trying to discover the planet that has the rebel base, and they're gaining more and more information over the course of the game about where that rebel base might be. And on the flip side, the Rebellion is either kind of trying to outlast the Empire and trying to kind of hold their own against an overwhelming force. A lot of the story elements from the game emerge from the characters that you play. You're kind of assigning different characters to missions each turn, and those missions might be very different than the actual plot of the Star Wars movies, but the game works despite that. The game works really, really well despite that. And yeah, it's a pretty incredible experience. If I have not played this game in quite some time, and I used to play with a friend who moved away, and I would like to play it again to remember how awesome it is, because it really does tell a pretty epic story every time you play. But I am worried about trying to relearn the game, because there is a lot of rules in the game. So I am glad that this has brought a lot of joy and a lot of high rankings to my fellow geek buddies. But this is not a game that I played in quite some time. Star Wars Rebellion. And yet a game that even as I was putting it on this list, I was trying to kind of refresh myself about some of the aspects of the game, because it is a game that holds such a special place in my memory. And it's rare that a game does that in terms of the theme and the stories it creates. So I want to continue to learn about this game and what makes it special as I move forward. So yeah, Star Wars Rebellion at number 6. At number 5, we have a game, the Castles of Burgundy. Specifically, actually, GeekBuddies ranked the new edition of it, the special edition. What is it called? The special edition. They ranked this quite highly on the list. That's how this is the version of the game that's on this list, the special edition specifically. And This is a game that took me a little while to come around to. The first time I played it, I didn't fully engage in it, and then I came back to it and I was like, oh wow, this is actually a really awesome game with maybe some questionable graphic design choices. But then the special edition addresses all of those graphic design choices, in my opinion, and makes it a much more accessible game in terms of the colors and the references that the game offers, so you know what all these different tiles mean. It is a game about dice drafting. You're drafting dice to activate different actions, and you're placing tiles on your little asymmetric board here to try to complete different regions on that board. Different tiles go in different regions. You can try to complete those regions to get a special bonus. And you can see here, there's a huge stack in this game of different configurations of regions. And they really do make the game feel a little bit different in terms of how you prioritize one type of tile over the next. So the game isn't saying necessarily, hey, you have to go after this type of tile in this game, but rather the board might push you slightly in a certain direction. It might say, okay, in this game, maybe you might want to prioritize the blue tiles over the green tiles early on in the game or later in the game. And some of the special tiles that you get that give you ongoing abilities, they might also push you in that direction as well. Really beautifully designed game, really beautiful version of the game in the special edition. And a lot of replayability in terms of just simply changing up your the configuration of your board. I think can make a big difference. I really love that about this game. That is the Castles of Burgundy Special Edition at number 5 on the Geek Buddy list. And number 4 is one of the top ranked games in the world. That is Ark Nova. And Ark Nova is also one of my favorite games. I can completely understand why this is on the Geek Buddies list. It is a game that has really a lot of complexity to it, a lot of depth. And yet the action system is so brilliant. And really the card layout and design, I think, is also really brilliant, where every card that you play gives you instant points, 2 different types of points potentially, either an instant benefit or an ongoing benefit or an endgame benefit, and some tags that help you play other cards. So after I've played this Eurasian Eagle Owl, for example, by paying 10 resources, using up a space in my habitat that can hold up a 2 value space, and I need a partnership with a zoo in Europe. After I have this card in play, then I have a Europe tag that I can use to play another card. I have a bird tag that might help me with another card or another benefit. Kind of tags upon tags upon tags, but meeting these thresholds, meeting these requirements, and then using them to unlock other requirements feels really, really good. The game does this card play really well. But going back to the depth and complexity, for a very deep game and a complex game, I really love the action system in this game and how streamlined it is, how the whole game, like all the actions in the game, the 5 actions in the game, 90% of what you're doing in this game is explained on 5 cards that are right in front of you at all times that you can read through and pretty much understand them from simply reading the text on the cards. I like that they didn't try to just put icons on the cards. They put the text that you need to read to understand how those actions work. They aren't shown in this picture here, but I really like that. I really, really like that action system in Ark Nova, along with the depth and the variety and the thresholds and the cost of these cards and the benefits that you gain from the variety of cards in the game as well. That's Ark Nova at number 4. Dune Imperium, the other Dune Imperium, the original here appears here at number 3. And I think it's pretty cool, actually, that the original appeared a little bit higher than the new version, because it is kind of a testament to how good the original game was and still is. I think it holds its own. I think if you're new to Dune Imperium, I think this is probably the place to start, and then you can get Uprising later. Not that Uprising is that much more complicated. One element that I didn't highlight when I was talking about Uprising that is in both games are the intrigue cards. This is one of my favorite mechanisms in the game. I love these little sneaky intrigue cards. These are cards that you draw that you keep to yourself, and when you're ready to play them at different times in the game, depending on when the card says you can play it, you play a card and you get an instant benefit that will catch other players off guard. And I like this. I think it fits perfectly into the theme of Dune, that you have a chance to be a little sneaky and backhanded without totally ruining someone else's strategy. But kind of they have to stay on their toes because they don't know what your intrigue cards are. You don't know what their intrigue cards are. They might be impacting battle. They might impact their worker placement. They might be surprise endgame points that you have to watch out for. And actually, that's one other thing about Dune Imperium that I didn't mention before, the idea that it is a race to 10 points. There aren't that many points to get in the game, so every point is really, really meaningful. It's very rare that I see a game do so much and have so many different options and abilities without having many of them dependent on points. Like typically in games like this, a game will balance a lot of different mechanisms by throwing points in there. But this one doesn't. It can't afford to because it only has 10 points in the game. You can't just throw a point on most of the cards. It's very rare to get points in this game, and it feels really, really good when you get that point because you're like, oh, wow, I'm a 10th of the way to victory because I got that first point. That's huge. So yeah, Dune Imperium, masterpiece of game design. I can see why it appears at number 3 on this list. And number 2 on the list is the other Clank that I referred to earlier. This is Clank Legacy. This is a spoiler-free image of what you get when you open the box of Clank Legacy. You have a bunch of starting cards, starting decks for different players, cards that go into the core deck. And it has this board. And this board is maybe a little bit hard to see in this picture, but what you can hopefully tell is that at the top of the board are actions that are already printed on the board. And then down here, you can see that there's a bunch of potential for actions. This is a great use of legacy stickers. Legacy means a game that has permanent changes, a game that features permanent changes that cannot be undone. The permanence is a core part of the game design. And that is the case in Clank Legacy because you know as soon as you open up this map that at some point in the game, you are going to be creating new actions on this board where your meeple, your explorer meeple, your adventurer meeple can eventually move on to those actions and benefit from them. And you have control over that. The game isn't telling you necessarily exactly what you have to put in these places. You are deciding what paths to take and what to place on those paths when you get there. Really cool mechanism in Clank Legacy. I don't want to spoil anything, but that is a non-spoiler element of the game. But yeah, we had a great time. And actually, the humor in this game is really clever too. I've seen a lot of games try to be funny and maybe not necessarily succeed, including perhaps some of my games. But this game is genuinely laugh out loud funny at different times based on some of the things that you'll discover in the game. So I am really excited to play the sequel to it, the part two that'll come out, I think, in 2025. But yeah, Clank Legacy, number 2 on my Geek Buddy list. Number 1, we have another legacy game, Pandemic Legacy, Season 1 specifically. This is the number 1 game. I think this is currently the number 2 game in the world based on the BoardGameGeek rankings. Based on my Geek Buddies, it is the number 1 pick. This is their top rated game. I imagine for many of them, based on the rating, the average rating of 39 different Geek Buddies is 9.1. This was only exceeded by actually a somewhat related game. Scythe: The Rise of Fenris was the top game on the Geek Buddy list at 9.34. That's an expansion, not a core game, so I didn't include it. And it's a Stonemaier game. But yeah, 9.1 suggests that many of my Geek Buddies have rated this game either a 9 or even a 10 because of the experience of playing it. This is kind of one of the quintessential early legacy games where Rob Daviau and Matt Leacock took an existing game, Pandemic, and created a fairly linear story where players are changing the board and changing some elements of their characters as they play. But I think one of the geniuses of this design and why it hit so well, I mean, part of it is that it was one of the first legacy games. And that's one of the reasons that it hit off so well, but it still seems to do very well. And people still enjoy discovering this game. And I think part of the reason for it is that linear story in Pandemic Legacy. It is not a story with a ton of different branching paths that you decide on. They decided to basically write like one really good season of TV that you get to have tiny little branches based on where things happen on your board or what happens to your characters. But for the most part, it is a linear story that they told, and they told that story really, really well. It gave them control over twists and turns rather than leaving those in the hands of the players and risk them not being as impactful or meaningful as the players were playing. So I think that's a really clever decision in Pandemic Legacy Season 1. It inspired me to play Season 2 and Season 0, all of which I enjoyed for different reasons. I will mention that Pandemic Season 0, which is the 3rd game in the series, did something that I thought was really clever in terms of giving you permission to advance to the next month in the game rather than making you replay the current month. That is maybe my only big hang up about Season 1 and partially Season 2, where if you lose a scenario, you have to replay it. And it can make the difference between you playing 12 sessions of this game, which is already a lot, and playing 24 sessions of the game, which is a lot for any legacy game, especially in this day and age when there are a lot of quality legacy. So I really like that little twist that Season 0 does. But Season 1 has held its ranking for a long time among many people, including the Geek Buddies on my list. I'd love to hear what you think about these games. Hopefully this list was somewhat helpful to you. I know it's very specific to my preferences, but if you watch these videos, maybe you share some of my preferences in games. And if you do feel like you share a lot of my preferences and maybe even preferences, my taste in games and the taste of my Geek Buddy list, feel free to let me know your BoardGameGeek username in the comments below. And maybe in the future, I'll revisit this list and see what a growing number of Geek Buddies over time, how their preferences change and how their ratings change and impact how I feel about games too. I think one of the cool things about the Geek Buddy list is that from now on, whenever I want to look up a game to see if it might be one for me, I can now look at my Geek Buddy rating to see if any of my Geek Buddies have rated that game and how they felt about it. That is a great use of the Geek Buddy list. Anyway, yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below about these games, or if you share my taste in games, let me know your BoardGameGeek username in the comments below. Thanks.